The first reading is from Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 to 9. A shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. The Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and of understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of prayer, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. He will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, or decide by what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. With justice he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. The wolf will lie with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. Their young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. The infant will play near the hole of the cobra, and the young child put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea. The second reading is from Luke chapter 19, verses 41 to 44. As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming."
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
First of all, a very big thank you for inviting me to share with you this morning on what appears to be a day when you just come to church and you eat, and then you eat some more and you stay for more church. Perfect Sunday. So as I was introduced, John called me our man in Jerusalem. That's not my official job title. My official job title is Methodist Liaison Officer, Jerusalem, but our man in Jerusalem will do. So normally I spend my time living and working in Jerusalem in the Methodist Liaison Office. The Methodist Liaison Office is a joint venture between the World Methodist Council, the United Methodist Church in the USA, and the British Methodist Church. And we normally have 3 members of staff, one British Methodist minister, currently myself, an American Methodist minister, although we don't have an American Methodist minister at the moment, and an office manager who is a local Palestinian Christian who keeps us all in order and keeps me in order anyway. And we are there, we are a Methodist presence in the Holy Land, and we do various things. We work as ecumenically as possible with other Christians in the land. We work into faith whenever it's possible, but you can imagine that's not always that easy. We work alongside and support any organisation that's working for human rights in the region, whether that be Palestinian, Israeli or international. We support various projects, a school, a hospital, a home for people with disabilities, a mediation centre, a Christian-owned farm called the Tent of Nations, and we used to offer volunteering opportunities. Not many people have wanted to volunteer in the last 2 years, but we do offer those when the situation is a little more stable. And the other thing that we do is if you come on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, we don't arrange it for you. I'm not a tour guide. I don't wander around Bethlehem with an umbrella and point out that Jesus stopped, that Mary and Joseph stopped there when, she was very close to giving birth to Jesus. I don't do any of that. But what we do say is organize your tour with your tour guide, but maybe put a day or two extra on. And what we'll do is introduce you to the living stones of Christianity in the region at the moment. Because on a pilgrimage, you come and you see the historical stones, the churches that have been built to commemorate parts of the life of Jesus. But we will introduce you to those Christians who are living there. And the first thing we say to you is, before you meet any of the local Christians, please do not ask them when they were converted, because they get very upset, because they can trace their families right back to Pentecost. They are not Muslims that have been converted. They're not Jews that have been converted. Well, maybe they were at Pentecost, but we can discuss that later. But they are there. They have been there for over 2,000 years. They're very proud of that. So that's a little bit of something I do. The other thing I do is to spend a little bit of time back in the UK to talk about the situation in Palestine and Israel. And just before I get to the sermon, just to say that at the back there, where John's currently sitting, there's some crafts that are from craftspeople around Bethlehem. They're for sale. Unfortunately, I can only take cash. I haven't got a card machine. But if you're interested, please have a look at them. All the money goes back to craftspeople around Bethlehem. The economy in Bethlehem since October the 7th has just been devastated. It relies on tourism. And for those people that aren't in the tourist trade, they probably work in Jerusalem, which is only a few miles down the road. But they are restricted as to how much they can actually get into Jerusalem. So life is very difficult. So if you could support that, that'd be brilliant. There is also a sign-up sheet. So if you'd like to be kept in touch with the work that the office does, and I can promise you, you will not be bombarded with emails because I'm not that organized. So it will probably be an email maybe once every couple of months, but it will just be an update about the situation, an update about the office, and it helps, and prayer points as well. So it'll help keep you in touch and also me in touch with you. And just to say that after the service, we are going to have a chance to have some questions and answers. Well, certainly questions. I'll try and answer them. So if you've got questions about what's happening, if you've got questions about the situation, things you've seen on the news or you've read, then please ask them then. What I want to do now is rather than do a talk about Israel-Palestine, I want to actually preach. But there will be an opportunity to have that conversation later. That's got to be the longest introduction I've ever done to a sermon. Jesus stopped and looked over Jerusalem, and he wept. And he said, "If only you knew on this day what makes for peace." For those of you that have been to the Holy Land, you know that if you stand on the Mount of Olives, which Jesus was when he wept and said these words, you can see the old city. It is very clear. And you can imagine Jesus standing there and weeping and asking the question and making the statement, "If only you knew what makes for peace." One of my favourite authors is George Orwell, the writer of 1984, Animal Farm, The Road to Wigan Pier. And when he was a youngish man, he actually went and fought in the Spanish Civil War. He travelled to Spain and he fought the fascists in the Spanish Civil War. And he recalls one day that he was told by his commander or general or captain or whatever, that he was on duty that morning and that he was to be on watch because there was a group of fascist fighters over the sort of other side. And basically he was given the order that if he saw any one of them, he was to shoot. And so he's there, he's watching, he's got his gun, he's got his finger on the trigger of his rifle, and suddenly he sees one of these fascist opposition pop up above the barricade, and his finger's ready, and he's got him in his sights, and then he doesn't shoot. And he recalls that he doesn't shoot because actually he watched the man, and he saw that he was actually doing up his trousers and putting his braces back on, and he realized he had just been to the toilet. And he said in that moment, in that very human action, he said, I realized something, that other people, regardless of the differences they have to me, are actually human beings. And he said, I couldn't shoot him because I realized he was as human as I was. There is only one way that we can go to war, and that is if we dehumanize the other person. The only way that we can shoot and kill and maim and blow up and starve and all those other things is when we dehumanize the people that we are doing it to. Because as human beings, we are created by God, we are all created in God's likeness, and we are God's children. And so when Hamas attacked on October the 7th, they had dehumanized the Israeli Defense Force soldiers that they would meet. They had dehumanized the people that would be living in the kibbutz so that they were able to kill and to maim and to take hostages and to hold hostages for so long. And when Israel started its nearly 2-year bombardment of Gaza, then they also dehumanized Palestinians. And they have told their soldiers and their pilots and everybody else that story that dehumanizes, so that they're able to obliterate neighborhoods. They're able to shoot children in the head with one bullet. They're able to starve them. And then when they do send some food in, able to shoot over 1,300 of them as they try and get food and water and survive. The only way you can do that is by dehumanizing them. And Israel has also dehumanized the Palestinians who live in the West Bank. The West Bank and Gaza are totally separate parts of Palestine. And the West Bank has been under occupation for the last 58 years. And so Israel has dehumanized the people, the Palestinians in the West Bank, and they restrict their movement by building a 30-foot high concrete wall that goes across the West Bank that snakes for 450 miles. And the only way Palestinians can get through it is through checkpoints. And those checkpoints are often closed, so they can't get to work or they can't go and see their family. They might be closed, so an ambulance that they've called for somebody that's ill can't actually get in. They have to have permits to travel. And depending on who you are and what you are, you may or may not receive those permits. Israel arrests people in the West Bank under what they call administrative detention. And that means that they think they can hold people for months without charging them. Very often people are held for 3-6 months without any charge and then released without any charge. You can only do these things when you dehumanize the other. Let me tell you a quick story about how deep the oppression of the occupation goes for Palestinians in the West Bank. There is a farm just outside Bethlehem called the Tent of Nations, and it's land that has been owned by a Christian Palestinian family for generations. And on the border, where the fence is, these mobile units appeared. And it turned out that these units were being erected to manufacture metal gates, big, long metal gates. And these metal gates are appearing right across the West Bank on the edges of all the Palestinian towns and villages. And they are being erected by Israel, and they are being used by Israel to control the movement of Palestinians. And if it's shut, it's shut. You, as a Palestinian, you can't open it. If you try and open it, then you will be shot. So these were being manufactured on the border of this land, the Tent of Nations. And when I was visiting the family there, I learned a little bit more about this. And basically, I learned that the laborers, the people doing the hard work, making these metal gates, were Palestinians. They were manufacturing the mechanism of their own oppression. And the reason that they were doing this was because, as I said before, the economy is so bad in the West Bank that they had a stark choice. They had to get work somewhere. And so some of them chose to work for Israel to make these gates that one day will cut off their village, which one day will stop them being able to go to work, which one day will stop ambulances, whatever. But they have chosen to do it because of the other choice is that they will just starve and their family will starve. This is how deep the oppression and the dehumanization goes within what we call Israel and Palestine. God has a very different idea. You see, God never dehumanizes anyone. In fact, when God decided that the time was right and that God needed to be revealed to the world, God actually did the opposite to dehumanization. God humanized God's self into Jesus Christ, became human, the divine, made flesh, and God chose to walk in what we now call the Holy Land. This place that I've just been talking about, a place of massive dehumanization. And God showed us what it meant to be truly human. Showed us what it meant to work for peace and to be peacemakers. And when he wept over Jerusalem and said, if only you knew, God, through Jesus, had been telling us what makes for peace. The teaching of Jesus is teaching that is taught under occupation. Let's not forget that when God came into this world, that the places like Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Jericho, Hebron, all those places we know from our Bible stories, they were occupied by a foreign force, by the Roman Empire. And people lived under a brutal occupation. And yet Jesus still teaches and says, if someone slaps you around your face, don't hit them back, turn the other cheek. If somebody forces you to carry their pack for a mile, say, right, yeah, no problem, I'll go for 2. And when Jesus was facing arrest, facing torture, facing death, humiliating death on the cross, and Peter is in the garden, he draws his sword, and he wants to save Jesus. Jesus says, no, Peter, put it back. Because that is not the way. Because what Jesus does, what God shows us, is that when you face evil, when you face violence, when you face war, when you face dehumanization, there is only one way to face it. And that is with love. And when Jesus walked carrying his cross to his death, he faced that evil and cruel death with divine love. If only we knew what makes for peace. But the world forgets it. The world forgets it so easily. Could we have the first image, please? I want to show you a couple of images. They're images of graffiti that you can see around the West Bank. I mentioned the wall before, this 30-foot concrete wall, as soon as it was erected, people started graffitiing on it. And then 1 or 2 famous graffiti artists visited the region. This first one I want to show you is, as you can imagine, because it says, welcome to Palestine, welcome to Bethlehem, is actually in Bethlehem. And if you travel from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, the few miles, the most direct way is to go through one of the checkpoints that's known as Checkpoint 300. And if it's open and if you're allowed through, then you'll go down the road and you'll see this bit of graffiti. And of course, we have the dove, this wonderful international image of what peace is. And if you asked anybody to draw peace, they'd probably put a dove in the photograph or in the picture that they drew. Or maybe they might put an olive branch, because that's another symbol of peace that we have. And here Banksy puts the dove with an olive branch in the beak. And in so many ways, strong, strong images of what peace is. But of course, we cannot ignore that this dove is wearing body armor. And not only is the dove wearing body armor, but you can probably see that there is a target right on the heart of the dove. I think this is what peace looks like when we forget what Christ says. I think this is what peace looks like when we continue to dehumanize the other. And we say, well, we can have peace, but we have to protect ourselves, and hence the body armor. And so we protect ourselves by spending more and more on arms and thinking that that will protect us. But of course, all that does is that the opposition have more and more arms, and we still have a target on our chest. And we are still willing to use those arms, dehumanizing the other, killing and maiming, and we say it's all in the cause of peace. We have the next slide, please. This is a very famous Banksy image and has been used across the world by Banksy in places of conflict. But this one is actually a photo taken in Bethsahor, the Shepherd's Fields area of Bethlehem. And it's on the side of a garage. And at first, this appears a much more aggressive image because we see a rioter, because, well, we know they're a rioter. They've got their baseball cap the wrong way round, and they've got a scarf over their mouth and their nose, and they're sort of dressed in a black top, and there's a very aggressive stance ready to throw something. And of course, what we expect to see in the hand that's going to do the throwing is a stone or a rock or a Molotov cocktail. But Banksy has painted a bunch of flowers. That universal image of love. And in fact, this bit of graffiti has the title, "Love is in the Air." And although this at first appears a little bit more aggressive, I actually think this is more akin to the image of peace that God teaches us through Jesus Christ. Because this is about somebody who is active. This is about somebody who wants to actually share love. This is somebody who wants to throw those flowers to the opposition, to the other person, not to dehumanize them, but to offer them love. I'll just share with you a story from Israel and Palestine. Story of a young Palestinian who, during the Second Intifada, so Intifada is an Arabic word which means uprising, and the Second Intifada was particularly violent. There were suicide bombings, there were bombs on buses, there was lots of people maimed and killed. And he was a teenager in his village in the West Bank, and they saw on a regular occurrence Israeli tanks coming into their village. And he and his mates, teenagers, would gather rocks and they would throw rocks at the tanks. One day, he and his friends discovered a case of hand grenades. And they made the decision that next time the Israeli tanks drew into their village, they weren't going to throw rocks, they were going to throw these hand grenades. Israeli tanks drew in one day, they got their hand grenades, they went to the mound where they'd stood throwing rocks before, they pulled the pins out, they threw the hand grenades, and they damaged the tanks. They didn't kill anyone, they didn't maim anyone, but they did damage the tanks. Within hours, they were found and they were arrested. And they spent a long time in an Israeli jail. And quite a way into the time that they spent in jail, this guy and his friends were picked out by a group of Israeli guards for no particular reason other than to make an example of them. And they were pulled out in front of all the other Palestinian prisoners, and they were beaten severely. And this particular guy that I'm talking about realized at one point that he was being made more of an example than anyone else, because his friends had been left lying on the floor, badly beaten, bruised, broken bones, and bloodied. And he was still being kicked and punched, and the guard was seemingly not going to stop anytime soon. And in the pain and in that moment, and in a moment when perhaps he even thought that he might end up being beaten to death, he says, I remember seeing an image from a film that we had been shown in this prison. And he said, I don't know why, but in that moment, my mind went back and saw this film. And the image that he recalls from the film is an image of Jewish people during the Holocaust being shepherded into the gas chambers. And he says, in that moment that I was being beaten so severely, in my pain, I suddenly realized the humanity of all people. And he said, if I realized the humanity of those Jews who faced an unjust death in the Holocaust, he said, I also needed to recognize the humanity of the man that was beating me. And he made a decision in that moment. And he said, if I survive this, then I am going to get to know this particular guard. He did survive, and after he had had a chance to recover, he sought this guard out. And he went up to him and quite simply said, tell me, what is it like to be an Israeli? And the guard was slightly taken aback, but started talking to him. Over the next few weeks, they had several conversations. And each time this young Palestinian was asking, what is it like? What's it like to be Jewish? What's it like to be in the Israeli Defense Forces? How do you feel about Palestinians? Why do you do what you do? Asking all those questions. And this guard started talking openly. He started bringing in, smuggling in sort of luxuries for this guy and his friends. And then eventually the guard turned to the Palestinian teenager and said, so tell me, what is it like to be a Palestinian? What is it like to live in the West Bank? What is it like to live under occupation? That guard started working for human rights for Palestinians. The young Palestinian that I'm talking about left prison eventually when he was released. He set aside any violent resistance to the occupation, and he was part of forming an organization called Combatants for Peace, which brings together Israelis and Palestinians, ex-Israeli soldiers, ex-Palestinians who have been involved in a violent struggle against the occupation. People who have realized that violence only creates more violence. It does not build peace. And they have given up their violence, and they live and work together to seek a peace that is based on justice, not force, not occupation. And when you come and visit me in Jerusalem, which I hope you will do, not all at once, I've not got that much room, but you're very welcome. And if you want to, I'll introduce you to the organization Combatants for Peace. And they will come and talk about the work that they do. And they will always talk with one Israeli and one Palestinian. They will never send just one person, because this is about Israelis and Palestinians working together in justice for peace. Ben said earlier that we take peace for granted in this country. I am worried. I am worried for our world and for our country. We have enjoyed peace, but we have a government that is preparing for war and is telling us that it is preparing for war. We have seen across nations an increase in arms spending. We cannot take peace for granted anymore, my friends. And I get upset because I hear our politicians saying we have to prepare for war. What we do not hear is anybody saying, how do we build for peace? And I think as a church, that is where we have to raise our voice now. I do not want to be living in a country where we happily dehumanize another nation, another state, another set of people with a different idea or ideology or even a different faith, because that is not the way of God. I don't want to live in a country that is preparing to say the only way we can keep peace is by going to war. When the Savior that I follow, when the God who called me in Jesus Christ says, I will face evil with love. When Jesus Christ says, actually, I am the Prince of Peace, and I have come that the world might be like that reading from Isaiah, where the lion and the lamb lie down together, where the people who have authority and power give it up to stand with those people who have lived in fear before. That is the image that our God gives us of a world. It is not an image where we use that power to maim and kill and to get peace by killing and destroying others. I believe God is calling us to raise our voice, to explain to the world that we face the evils of this world with love, that we build for peace, because that is the way of God, not the way of the world. In the name of Jesus, the Prince of Peace, amen. Amen.